On the 24th of February 1989, United Airlines Flight 811 was making its way from Los Angeles in America to Sydney in Australia, with a stop in Hawaii on the way. When taking off from Hawaii, the plane was subject to explosive decompression, forcing the crew into a life and death battle to return the stricken aircraft to safety. United Airlines Flight 811 was a regular scheduled flight between Los Angeles and Sydney, with stops in Honolulu in Hawaii and Auckland in New Zealand. The aircraft for the 24th of February flight was a Boeing 747-122, which was acquired by United Airlines in 1970. It was the 89th Boeing 747 ever built. Over the course of its lifespan, it had accumulated over 58,000 flight hours, and had never been involved in any accidents. The crew on board included 50-year-old Captain David Cronin, who was an experienced pilot with over 28,000 flight hours. Flight 811 was scheduled to be his second-to-last flight before his mandatory retirement due to his age. He was accompanied by 48-year-old First Officer Gregory Allen Slader, who had 14,500 flight hours, and 46-year-old Flight Engineer Randall Thomas, with 20,000 flight hours under his belt. There were 15 flight attendants on board, aged between 26 and 48. It was, all in all, an experienced and very competent crew. This crew would be in charge of 337 passengers, close to the maximum capacity of the aircraft. The aircraft itself was a typical 747. It featured a partial double-deck design with a raised cockpit. This, combined with the front cargo door, meant that this passenger aircraft could be converted to transport freight if necessary. When transporting passengers, it would do so in style. There was a lounge area upstairs with premium passenger seating, accessed by a spiral staircase that was considered iconic of Boeing at the time. At just past midnight on the 24th of February, the crew reported for duty, following a 34-hour layover in Hawaii. They helped passengers onto the plane, many of whom were New Zealanders and Australians that were returning home after a holiday. Everything went smoothly, all of the passengers were seated, bags were loaded into the cargo hold, and the fuel tank was filled. At 1:52 a.m., Flight 811 taxied and took off from Honolulu Airport. As the plane began its ascent, Captain Cronin saw some thunderstorms in the distance. He made the decision to keep the fasten seatbelt sign on for longer than he otherwise would, as he anticipated some turbulence up ahead. This was a decision that would, inadvertently, save the lives of many passengers. As soon as it was safe to do so, the cabin crew began serving drinks and preparing meals. Around 17 minutes into the flight, there was a loud thump which shook the whole plane, prompting Captain Cronin to exclaim, "What the hell was that?" Nobody else in the cockpit had time to reply before the plane was rocked by an explosion. In a split second, a huge hole opened up on the right side of the plane, next to the business class section of seats. The floor collapsed, and rows 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 in that section of the plane were ripped out into the open air, along with the 9 people that occupied those seats. These 9 passengers were never seen again, and their bodies were never recovered. Back in the cockpit, Captain Cronin and the other crew found themselves without power for 21 agonizing seconds. After 21 seconds, backup power kicked in, causing the cockpit voice recorder to resume recording. It captured the crew frantically trying to establish what they were dealing with. First Officer Slader addressed air traffic control. "Okay, it looks like we've lost number 3 engine. And, we're descending rapidly. Coming back." The crew began working together to coordinate an emergency descent, unaware as they did so that behind them on the main deck, crew and passengers were fighting for their lives. Flight attendant May Sapolu had been in the business class cabin when the explosion took place, and she clung onto a seat to stop herself from being sucked through the hole in the side of the plane. Other passengers and crew were able to drag her back to safety. Another member of the crew, Laura Brentlinger, was walking up the staircase when the hole opened up. She later recalled, "I was hanging onto the rungs and my feet were literally off the ground, hanging in mid-air." Anything that wasn't secured was swept up by the violent storm of air that swirled around the cabin. Luggage, ceiling panels, personal items, meals, and drinks. At the same time, the outer skin of the aircraft was peeling off, exposing the framework. Debris was flying out of the plane and impacting the stabilizers and the right side of the plane. Back in the cockpit, the crew put on their oxygen masks, only to discover that the oxygen supply for the entire plane had been destroyed. As the wind howled around them, Captain Cronin asked Flight Engineer Thomas to tell the cabin crew to prepare for an emergency landing. As all of the internal communication systems were down, Thomas had to get up and make his way back to deliver this message in person. It was at this point that he saw the full extent of the damage. He later said, "I looked outside. It was just like looking through a picture window. I could see the wing and both engines, and at that time, engine number 4 was in flames." The pilots performed a 180-degree left turn so that they were heading back towards Honolulu. Their emergency descent had got them to an altitude that enabled them to breathe without oxygen masks, and they had already begun dumping fuel to reduce their landing weight. When Thomas returned and reported the damage, he advised that exceeding the plane's stall speed by more than a small margin would be dangerous. Meanwhile, the cabin crew, fighting the wind, debris, and incredible stress of the situation, used megaphones to prepare the passengers for a crash landing. Passengers helped one another as best they could. Some were assigned specific jobs by the crew, such as opening emergency doors once the landing was complete, while others took it upon themselves to hand out life jackets. As they approached the airport, the landing gear was extended. They couldn't reduce their speed as much as they normally would due to damage to the flaps, but Captain Cronin managed to bring the plane to a halt without overshooting the runway. Within 45 seconds of the plane stopping, all of the remaining passengers and crew had exited the aircraft. In the immediate aftermath of the landing, an investigation was launched by the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB. There was no sign that the explosion had been caused deliberately, and it was quickly ascertained that the missing cargo door would be a crucial piece of evidence. Despite an extensive search, however, they could not locate that door. This initial investigation concluded that the most likely cause of the disaster was human error by the ground crew. However, Kevin and Susan Campbell, the parents of Lee Campbell, one of the victims, decided to conduct their own investigation using documents obtained from the NTSB. They concluded that the likely cause was not human error, but a design flaw in the cargo door, combined with an electrical issue. The main problem, as they saw it, was that the Boeing 747 had an outward opening cargo door, as opposed to a plug door, which opens inwards and jams against the frame as the external pressure drops, making it impossible to open accidentally. While the outward opening door design that was used left more room inside the cargo hold, it needed a strong and foolproof locking mechanism to keep it shut. Potential issues with these outward opening cargo doors had been highlighted as early as the 1970s, but had not been addressed. In late 1990, the two halves of the cargo door were recovered by a deep-sea submarine, and the NTSB investigation was reopened. Meanwhile, in 1991 at JFK Airport, a 747 cargo door malfunctioned during maintenance and opened spontaneously, an incident that caused no harm but cast further doubt on the safety of the 747 cargo door. After further investigation, the NTSB concluded that the cause of the United Airlines Flight 811 disaster was the cargo door opening suddenly due to improper wiring and a design flaw. They recommended that every 747 have their cargo door latching mechanisms replaced, with a sub-recommendation that all outward opening cargo doors be replaced with inward opening ones. The only trace of any of the 9 victims of the tragedy were small body fragments and pieces of clothing that were found inside the No. 3 engine. The victims were named as Anthony and Barbara Fallon, Harry and Susan Craig, Lee Campbell, Dr. John Crawford, John Swan, Rose Harley, and Mary Handley Desso. The plane itself was repaired and re-registered, returning to service in 1990. The heroic actions of the crew of United Airlines Flight 811 were recognised when they were awarded the Secretary's Award for Heroism, although after their near-death experience on board Flight 811, only 3 of the flight attendants would ever work on board an aeroplane again.